Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, The Answer Company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center and Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. The Minnesota Twins are looking forward to another great season in 2023, led by the return of All-Stars Carlos Correa and Brian Buxton. With the return of numerous players who were injured in 2022 and some new acquisitions, another division crown and a return to the World Series are in their sights. Established in 2007, 45th Parallel Spirits was among the first 50 micro-distilleries in the United States. Based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, all aspects of production occur at our facility. If you're interested in visiting and learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check our website and plan a visit to tour our facility and taste our spirits. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Access to Democracy. I'm your host, Steve Francisco. On this beautiful spring day here in Minnesota, on the beginning of Memorial Day weekend, it's my pleasure to welcome to our studio Minnesota State Senator Jim Carlson, who represents Senate District 52. Jim, tell us real quickly, what territory do you cover here in the South Metro? What is your Senate district?
Well, now since redistricting, I have lost some of the Burnsville area that I used to have. We still keep the east and north part of Burnsville. I lost the area around Lebanon Hills Park in southern Eagan, but I gained northern Eagan, what we call Precinct 1, which is north of Lone Oak Road. And then I gained Mendota Heights and the city of Mendota. So I have some new groups as well.
So a good chunk of the South Metro area. So I think you have just completed what many commentators are observing as one of the most significant legislative sessions in Minnesota history, certainly during your time in the state Senate. I've even heard some people compare what has just been accomplished at the legislature to 1973, when the Minnesota legislature passed the so-called Minnesota Miracle, which changed the way public education was funded in Minnesota. But let's just touch on a couple of the highlights, and then I want to ask you in more detail just to give our viewers, get them up to speed about what got done. You passed a $72 billion two-year budget. Minnesota's on a biennial two-year budget process. That includes $2.6 billion for infrastructure projects, $2.2 billion for schools, more than $1 billion for human services, the environment, natural resources, a $3 billion tax cut plan that Democrats say is aimed at working families. Republicans say that Democrats have overreached and will pay for all of this at the polls in November 2024. What say you?
Oh, I think we'll probably pay for it in increased turnout and increased margin. The fact of the matter is that as the chair of the Elections Committee, we did everything we could to make voting easier and more accessible to more people. And I think that is a good thing to have everyone that is eligible to vote be able to participate. And you have to think that they can't participate even in a city council race, a school board race, because they're not allowed to vote if they had a felony conviction in their past and they still were on paper. Well, we erased that paper, and that kind of is comparable to other states. A lot of other states have erased that.
We should clarify, you've erased it for people who have completed, who are not on paper still serving sentences.
No, yes, not on paper.
Right.
Once they're out of incarceration, they can vote.
Right.
So it's just out of incarceration.
Yes.
And you have to earn that. You can't be a person with bad behavior and get out. So really, you have earned the ability to get out there and be involved in your community, be involved with your family, go to vote with your son and daughter, all of those kinds of things. And that really, we feel, puts a little bit more confidence in that person who has made a mistake in their past and maybe now has grown up and now wants to be part of the community, and now they can go out and vote, and they won't have recidivism. There's a major change in the ability of people to stay away from crime once they know that they're involved in the community.
And after all, isn't that the goal of corrections?
Exactly.
People pay for their mistake, and then we should reintegrate them into society.
Exactly.
People deserve a second chance.
Yes.
Yeah.
But if
Very
they
good.
misbehave, they're back in.
Yeah.
And they lose that vote.
So let's talk about how the legislature got to this point where you were able to develop this huge budget, including big tax cuts that are going to go to Minnesotans. Minnesota is projected to be running a $17 billion plus surplus over the next 2 years, which gave you a lot of room to run here for spending on priorities of DFLers in both the Minnesota House Senate. The election of November 2022, the voters of Minnesota decided to give Governor Walz another term in office, and they elected majorities in the Minnesota House and the Minnesota Senate. Wasn't that a key in your ability to get things done this year, the fact that we have so-called unified government?
Absolutely it was. Now, I'm not sure which story I should tell you first, how we got the projected surplus. Now, a surplus is something that comes from the estimates in February or November on what the economy is going to be like, what the tax situation is going to be like, and what the spending is going to be like. And that's according to existing law. So if we change existing law, it changes the forecast. So what happened is that during the COVID, a lot of the costs of the state were absorbed by the federal government. You could go to get your tests, you could go to get your inoculations, you could do all of that without cost to you and without cost to your insurance company. And the federal government paid an awful lot of those costs. And that's what actually rose the income of many groups that were part of this whole situation because they got reimbursed. And so there was, and then there were corporations that had just an incredible year, and one of them is Amazon, delivering to your home.
We have a facility right here in Eagan.
That's right, yes. And so Amazon, and then people were paid retention bonuses, which increase their income. And when you have increased income, you pay increased taxes. So there was a lot of things that contributed into this, both personal and corporate. And now, when both personal and corporate had more income and more discretionary funds, they went out and bought things that were taxable.
In the sales tax,
yes.
They paid sales tax on those things.
So the sales tax made a huge jump.
Yeah.
Now that will not happen again.
Right.
That's why we call it one-time money. And it was probably worth, $10, $12 billion, that increase. But we still had about somewhere between 9 and 12 billion at this time last year in both forecast and in the bank. We hate to say in the bank, but we did have money in the bank at that time. And guess what happened? What happened was we were at the end of the session. We had probably $9 billion in the bank. We didn't have a tax bill. We didn't have a bonding bill. We didn't have a transportation bill. We didn't have a state government and elections bill. We didn't have an education bill. We also didn't have an omnibus energy bill. I'm reading off my list here.
Right.
And we didn't have an environmental omnibus bill, nor a health and human services omnibus bill. All of those would have spent money. All of them. So what we had was, we were on the 1 yard line. The Republicans had possession of the ball. We were a 6-6 tie, and they could have snapped the ball and easily gotten over into the I'm sorry, we were 6-0. They could have snapped the ball and easily gotten over the into the end zone and made it a 6-6 tie, so we could have gone into overtime. But what did they do? They walked off the field. They decided to walk off the field and not stay in a special session and do their job to finish these bills, which are their responsibility.
So I want to ask you about, from the Republican point of view, one of the criticisms of what happened. Let's take the tax bill. $3 billion. The Republican argument is that with a $17 billion surplus, that tax cut should have been much, much bigger. But you were just saying a moment ago, weren't you, Jim, that we really need to view that surplus. A lot of it is one-time money.
Right. It's one-time money.
So,
not coming back. Yeah, it's not, and we already know that. I think the 24-25 projection, based on the same bills that gave us this big forecasted surplus, is gone down.
Let's talk about the tax bill, because I think our viewers are interested. Who's going to get this money? Who is eligible to receive a tax rebate under the bill that was passed?
Well, I don't have the exact number. It seems to me it's
I actually did.
$76,000
$75,000 for individuals, and $150,000 for couples filing jointly.
Right.
They'll get a check.
They'll get it.
But if you're above that, you won't get one.
You'll start to deteriorate. It'll go down.
Declines.
It goes down to about 100, and I think it's 150,000, something like that.
But it just comes down to, it seems Democrats and Republicans this session had a fundamentally different view about how we got to the surplus, how long the surplus is going to last, and how big the tax cut should have been.
Yes.
Yeah, just a sort of synopsis.
And what we spent it on, too, because if you listen to some of the popular disinformation centers, some PACs and some I got to think, I usually call them stink tanks, but they're really think tanks. They're telling you, give it back, give it back, give it back. Well, do you want it to go back to Amazon? Do you want it to only go back to the people that got new jobs or increases? Do you want it to go back to more corporations? No, you think you paid it and you didn't. If you didn't get any of those kinds of advantages, you didn't pay in like you think you did.
Right.
And so they want it back, and we wanted to do what is our responsibility, and that is to invest it. Some of it is being invested in tax cuts. That's an investment, because we're expecting something back out of that.
That's right. People are going to spend that money as soon as they get that check back.
And we're investing it in schools. We're investing it in transportation. We made huge investments of billions of dollars in transportation.
Let's talk about transportation, because you serve on that committee too.
Yes.
Transportation is vital to those of us living in the South Metro, but it's also vital to people living in rural areas of Minnesota, particularly those districts where you have farm and agricultural products that need to get to market. Isn't building and improving our roads and highways and fixing potholes and making sure we have state-of-the-art infrastructure, that's a key to preserving prosperity in Minnesota?
I would think so, yes. Fixing
potholes. Why is it that so many legislators, your colleagues who represent those areas, don't look at it that way?
There's a mind block there that I don't understand. First of all, it is the metro area that pays the most in gas tax, automotive sales tax, license tabs, all of those that go into the highway funds. So when you're talking about something in greater Minnesota, much of that money comes from the metropolitan area. So we have to figure out sometimes how to convince them,
right,
and sometimes how to allocate it. And one of the things that we've had this big problem with is the bonding bill, because neither caucus, neither the Republicans nor the Democrats, have the supermajority. They need 45 votes to get a bonding bill passed. And we never could get the Republicans to commit those votes. And I have been saying this for more than a year now, and I think it's caught on a little bit. If they vote against the bonding bill, they need to have a care that their project might be taken out, or maybe it might be line item vetoed by the governor. So there was a lot of talk that way this year, and we actually had at the end of February a bonding bill that had a fair number of Republican projects in it, because it was the same bill that we passed last year. And this year it was a party line vote, and well, we didn't get it passed. And then Sandy Pappas, the capital investment person, said, okay, you didn't want bonding, so we have the cash, so we can do all cash. And we do have a forecasted surplus that won't miss another $2 billion, so we're going to do a cash bill. And that just sent them apoplectic.
Yeah.
And they realized that they goofed up right away, and they've been let's say, negotiating with Kerry Dietzich ever since then to try to bring back that bonding bill.
So that they can get some of that money.
So just 2 days ago,
we've got a big agenda to get through, Jim, because you guys got so much done, and I don't want to get through without touching a few other issues.
Sure.
One of the highest priorities of many legislators and anti-hunger advocates was universal school lunch bill, which actually passed this year. I know that Hunger Solutions Minnesota, Colleen Moriarty, was in favor of this. We just had Jason Viana from the Open Door Food Pantry here in Eagan was on, talked about how important this is to support families that are struggling. And so tell us, what is the significance of this universal school lunch bill?
Well, it's multi-pronged. I brought this up in 2013. I can remember where I was sitting, which room I was in, and what happened there when I heard somebody say that they were going after the kids for not having their lunch debt paid.
Lunch shaming, they call it.
Yes, and they were dumping out their food.
Right.
And I said, who is allowing this? And
that should never happen.
And I talked to the 3 districts that I represent here, asking them if they did that, and they assured me, no, we're not doing that, we're not doing it. But we still found school districts that were doing that. The lunch shaming. If the student couldn't come up with their paid-off lunch bill, then they'd give them a simple sandwich, and it was shaming. And so we've worked on that for a long time, and finally this year, Waltz worked enough in schools that he knew
he's a
that
former
this was
teacher
not
in Mankato, right?
It's an embarrassing thing.
And your
for
wife
kids.
is a former teacher,
That's
Gail,
right.
at Eagan High School. But it seems like, making sure that kids have good meals is instrumental in not just feeding them in nutrition, but improving their prospects to do well in school, especially for younger children who are still developing. That this is something that this is not optional. This is essential if you want kids to do well.
And one thing we didn't really talk, I think clear enough, is what is the cost to a district to chase down all these unpaid bills? I talked with Peter Olson-Skoog from District 197 here in West St. Paul, and I asked, how do you do it? And he said, well, first the teacher approaches the student, then the teacher calls the parents, then the principal calls the parents, then the superintendent calls the parents, then they turn it over to the police.
Much easier to the police, really. Much easier just to make sure that our kids are fed and can set themselves up to learn. Statewide paid medical leave coming in 2026 because of a bill that was passed and signed by Governor Walz.
Signed yesterday. Yes.
Really significant, because this has been an issue. There's been federal legislation which is voluntary medical leave, We've had that in place at the federal level for some time, but now this is going to make sure that not only private sector employees, but also public sector employees are covered, as I understand it. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Well, public sector employees generally had something that compared. That's what the bill says, is that if you have something that's better, you can keep that. Otherwise, you have to have something that's minimum.
So this is a big step forward for private sector employees who need time off to take care of an ailing parent, spouse, or child.
And the small businesses need to know that if you have less than 30 employees and less than $1 million in sales, you're exempt.
You're exempt. Codification of abortion rights, as we all know, the Supreme Court last year in the Dobbs decision overturned the 50-year-old precedent of Roe versus Wade, basically protecting a woman's right to choose in terms of terminating a pregnancy with certain guidelines in the first 1 or 2 trimesters. But Minnesota moved, unlike many of our surrounding states, moved to codify abortion rights in state law. Say a word about that.
Yeah, there were 2 bills that needed to pass. The first one was to codify what is the woman's authority. So that was put into law. It didn't delete any old laws. It just codified. And you may remember we had a Supreme Court.
The Gomez decision.
We had a Supreme Court, the Gomez decision, but then we also had a lower court decision that the restrictions that had been put in were unconstitutional. So we put in there that a woman has the right to make her own decisions. Now, there's still the laws in there that are from the past, but they've been ruled unconstitutional. But it only takes a snap of the fingers to bring them back. So our next bill was Senate File 70, which has not been passed yet. But what that does is it goes through all of that statute let's say the statutes that allow abortion to be punished, and puts in all kinds of restrictions and things that have been rendered unconstitutional, but it takes them out of statute. So they're no longer in statute, and they can't go back in real easily.
It's very interesting to me that the codification on abortion rights and a woman's right to control decisions about her body, we heard the argument that, well, if Roe versus Wade was overturned, we would leave it to the states to determine whether or not we'd have abortion accessible. What we're finding now is at least 26 states in our country have enacted very strict laws, sometimes even prohibiting abortions at 6 weeks, when many women don't even realize that they're pregnant. And also differences on limitations for whether it's cases of rape or incest. So the fact that Minnesota has done this, we have now become an island in the upper Midwest for women who seek to have this procedure. Very interesting. Legalization of marijuana, here's an issue that's made a lot of news, but there's also some misunderstanding and misinformation. I've heard some people characterize as saying, well, Minnesota just threw the doors open to legalize marijuana. Anybody can get as much as they want and have it. People can sell it all over the place. Give us the facts on what actually happened on legalization of marijuana.
There was a lot of work done on that bill. I don't know how many pages it is now, but it was in the hundreds. And Lindsay Port, the senator from Burnsville, is the one that did this. She had meetings once a week on just cannabis. She called anybody that wanted to be part of it to show up at that meeting.
Express any point of view.
And do anything, say anything you want, and let's try to work out your issues with it. And she did just an amazing job in going after all of those issues and answering them. And so what we have is it's a very complex bill, and it actually, and I think, I could be wrong with the number here, but I think it involves 40 licenses. If you want to sell seeds, if you want to grow marijuana, if you want to grow it at home, if you want to sell it, if you want to be in marketing.
What I had seen in the news was you can have up to 2 pounds, individuals can. Also, if you have a criminal record, not for selling, but for simple possession of marijuana, that over time criminal records will be expunged. This is an important issue for a person trying to find a job, because sometimes that could prohibit you from finding employment.
Exactly.
Also, setting up a regulatory process for the legal sale and a 10% sales tax attached to sales. But the regulatory process for legalized marijuana sales, that's going to take a little while. That doesn't happen right now. It's going to take, I hear, year to year and a half, maybe 2 years.
January of 2026 is when all that's the effectivity of all the laws.
Yeah.
So,
We're down to about 2.5 minutes, Jim. A couple more issues to hit. This is great. The Minnesota Nurses Union had a bill that made a lot of news this year, having to do with setting some staffing ratios in state law. It grew out of frustration of nurses and other healthcare professionals who, let's be frank, they were pushed to the absolute limits during the COVID pandemic these past 3 years. And so they wanted some staffing ratios. The bill passed, but the Mayo Clinic of Rochester became very outspoken, saying, we are not going to put more investments into Minnesota if you, the legislature, pass this and if the governor signs it. And ultimately, there was a carve-out in this bill for the Mayo Clinic. Is that right? Tell us how this came to be and what your thoughts were on this legislation.
Well, the Mayo Clinic claims...
Less than 2 minutes.
Yeah, first of all, we've been working on this for a long time, ever since I first got into
the new
Senate.
issue.
No, it's not a new issue. And we've had varying participation by hospitals, and to have them report to the nurses what they already report to the the CMS, the
Center for Medicaid Services.
And a lot of hospitals wouldn't do it. And so we were really frustrated with that. And so this bill came out of some of our new senators, and they wanted to get it passed. And then the Mayo said, we have our own system of assigning nurses, and so we're not interested in complying with your system. And we have 30 hospitals around Minnesota.
Mostly in southern Minnesota, in the area which Governor Walz formerly represented in Congress.
So they wanted to be exempted. And I can't say that that didn't cause a lot of angst. And we're going to have to come back and do something.
I was going to ask you, it seems fair to say this is an issue that's not going to go away, that the debate about staffing ratios is going to be something that the legislature is probably going to be looking at again next session.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think it's fair to, we're just about to run out of time. I just want to say real quickly, it seems that so much got done this year, but even when you accomplish so much, there's always going to be a few issues on the table, and we'll surely see those back at the legislature this next session.
Yeah, I want to say one additional thing about having 34 versus 33 votes. Every senator was a majority leader and could change their vote and change it to the other side. So what that meant is any bill that we were bringing up, we had to make sure we had all 34 votes.
Jim Carlson, Minnesota State Senate, thank you so much for being with us on Access to Democracy.
Cheered up. Thank you.